Hello and welcome to how to build Tomb King armies. First things first, let's go over the strengths and weaknesses of the Tomb Kings as a whole. For their strengths, they have free recruitment and upkeep, so you never have to worry if you have enough to pay your troops. They also have a lot of powerful constructs that fit into any situation if you choose the right one. They have a very limited but very devastating ranged roster, and all of their units will fight to the death since they cannot retreat. Now for the weaknesses, the downside of that free recruitment means that they work on a capacity-based system, where each building you gets you unit capacity as well as recruitment availability. I'm not going to be paying attention to this in my comps, so when playing your campaigns, just get as close to these as you can with what you have. The downside of the units fight to the death means if the leadership breaks, their deaths will come that much quicker due to them crumbling and eventually disintegrating. And finally, their powerful monsters require a lot of babysitting as they are quick to fall when surrounded, particularly by a lot of anti-large. Now let's get into our early game composition. For this comp, we have access to tier 0 units. These are the only Lord option, the Tomb King, Skeleton Warriors and Skeleton Spears, and tier 1 units, Skeleton Chariots and Skeleton Archers. For our early game composition, shockingly, we're going to be leading them with a Tomb King. We don't really have a choice, so we're going with them. They're decent frontlines fighters and duelists, but will lose to anything that is a specialized duelist, so just make sure to keep them supported in everything they do. For the front lines, we're going with 9 Skeleton Spears. They have better defense than Warriors, and in the early game, that's really all that matters, and why Spears are my choice. They want to hold the line for as long as possible, and allow your other units to do all the damage for them. Their damage won't be anything special, so make sure to back them up with your Lord, and keep their leadership high so they don't melt too quickly. We're going with 8 Skeleton Archers. These have pretty poor damage, but decent range and a good amount of ammo. This means they can constantly be firing and chip away at anything, particularly if it's a large target. They also have a decent firing arc, so feel free to keep them firing over units' heads. As long as they keep firing, it really doesn't matter. Just keep them safe as they don't last 2 seconds in melee. Finally, we're going with 2 Skeleton Chariots. Now I can't use chariots to save my life, but let's dip our toes in here since we need something to take out the enemy back lines. Charge them around the enemy and into their ranged troops, and keep them on the move as much as possible to keep up their momentum so they can plow through enemies with ease. Just don't get them stuck in enemy blobs, or they will go down like a sack of taters. The strengths of this composition, the large number of ranged units can take out pretty much anything more elite than them just by using sheer numbers, as 1,000 arrows doing 1 damage are still doing 1,000 damage each time. The chariots, when used well, can bowl over anything in the early game, especially ranged units, so once you get in some practice, they should put in some serious work. Also, the amount of front lines and their okay defense stats mean it's going to take the enemy a decent chunk of time to get to you. As for the weaknesses, pretty much everything in the army is chaff, so if the enemy has any stronger units or even weak magic, you are going to get rolled pretty quickly. You also don't have a great answer for any superior fighting lords, since your lord isn't the greatest, and nothing in the army can provide significant help. Finally, a lot of your damage is coming from the ranged, and if you get flanked, they will literally disappear, so you must keep them safe at all costs. Coming to our mid-game army composition now, we have access to tier 2 units, Skeleton Archer Chariots, Nehekara Warriors, Skeleton Horsemen, Skeleton Horse Archers, the Carrions, and our heroes which require at least 16 turns of research to complete, so I'm just going to put them here to make it easy. We have Lich Priests of Light, Death and Nehekara, Necrotex, and Tomb Princes. And finally, the Casket of Souls, which again is available via a right once you've got 20 units in your entire faction. I'm going to put them in tier 2, just because it makes it simple, and you can unlock them at about the mid-game. In tier 3, we have access to Screaming Skull Catapults, Tomb Guard with Halberds, Nehekara Horsemen, Sepulchral Stalkers, and Ushabti. The mid-game composition, of course, we're still leading with that Tomb King. If you want, you can pick up a mount by now, but I would suggest saving for the final mount since it is the best, and allows you to spend your points elsewhere. If you do this, they'll still be pretty much the same, but hopefully you will have picked up some skills to either improve them or your army so that they aren't totally useless. I'm going to slot in a Lich Priest of Nehekara here. Not my favourite lore in the game, but it is unique to them and probably the best choice from the 3 that you have, and it's always worth bringing some spell power to your battles. Keep them safe behind the battle lines and provide spell support where needed. The front lines are upgrading to 4 Tomb Guard and 2 Tomb Guard Halberdiers. This is a huge upgrade. These skellies have more health, armour, leadership, melee stats and damage, and are the top of the line infantry for the Tomb Kings. Going with 4 regular allows you to have that meaty middle to take out the enemy infantry with huge weapon strength. The 2 halberds give them protection on the sides from cav charges and bring some brilliant damage for the large targets in the enemy armies. The only downside of these guys, their armour isn't the best. We're also bringing 4 Ushabti. These will bring some more damage to the front lines with these monstrous constructs. They do brilliant anti-infantry and armour piercing damage, so are a great choice for embedding in the front lines. Just keep them safe from ranged fire if you can, since they are a bit large and tend to stick out and be easier targets. We're going with 2 Sepulchral Stalkers, and I adore these lads. They are brilliant sneaky constructs with devastating magical and armor-piercing missiles, as well as a tasty bit of melee damage with a bonus versus large, meaning they are excellent flanking units. Deploy them somewhere hidden, stalk up behind, and rain death into the backs of the front lines before heading into melee versus undefended ranged troops. As long as they don't get pinned down and surrounded, they should do pretty well versus pretty much anything. We're dropping down to 4 skeleton archers to make room for other units, but they are still worth having for some presence in the back lines. Closing out this comp, we have 2 Screaming Skull catapults. Of course, if you can afford to, replace them with Casket of Souls because they're just flat out better. The Screaming Skulls do massive damage over a huge range with armor piercing, magical, and leadership sapping shots. They are top tier catapults, so fire in an arc, and are more than happy to fire shots over the heads of your units. Caskets somehow have even more range and a massive chunk more damage, as well as being better in pretty much every other stat. Oh, and they give you more Winds of Magic to play with. They are only unlockable via the right, but if you can't get them, it's a no-brainer to upgrade because they are just absolutely devastating. Strengths of this army, basically every single aspect of it has been upgraded in terms of damage and survivability. The front lines are tougher and will output a significant portion of the damage. The ranged has received a nice upgrade in damage output. Even the flanking units are much better. Spellcaster also means we're starting to get some character utility a little bit more online. For the weaknesses, still not a brilliant dueling capacity since the Lord hasn't really changed and the caster isn't going to get up to much to help this. Still going to be vulnerable to flanks since the ranged units aren't really going to put up much of a fight at the moment, and the introduction of large units mean they are more at risk of being hit with missiles, both friendly and hostile. Coming to our late game composition now, we have access to tier 4 units, Necropolis Knights, Ushabti Greatbows, Tomb Scorpions, and Bone Giants, and tier 5 units, Necropolis Knight Halberdiers, Kemrian War Sphinxes, Necrosphinxes, and Hero Titans. The late game composition, of course, we've got that Tomb King, but he should now be on top of the Kemrian War Sphinx mount, and isn't it a beaut? Now he'll be a force to be reckoned with in the front lines with devastating anti-infantry damage. He may still struggle in duels as this is more of an anti-blob mount than a single target, but with this much damage, it's certainly an improvement. The Lich Priest of Nehekara should have all their spells in a skeletal steed mount, so he'll be zooming around the battlefield providing spell support where needed. At full capacity, this Lord should output some decent damage, as well as a fair whack of utility for buffing yourself and debuffing the enemy. We're going to employ Necrotect here, a third hero, which is unheard of, but this many constructs, you need one of these guys. They provide a ton of buffs to their damage and defense just by being there, so get them involved in the front lines alongside constructs and get easy passive value. If any of them get too low, you can also give them a boost in HP. They can get on a chariot mount, but I can't use them to save my life, and this army also has a fair bit of micro, so I'm choosing not to. Sticking with the same front lines as before, please note that lack of armor really comes to bite you in the ass in the late game, but there's not really anything you can do about it, since they are at the top of the line. We're going to go over Kemrian War Sphinx, which is basically the same as the Lord, but without the Lords on top. This literally just loses a little bit of HP, leadership, and weapon strength. Other than that, works exactly the same. Get into enemy blobs and tear them to pieces. We're going to take a single Necrosphinx. This is an anti-large, large unit that specializes in going toe-to-toe with other huge targets quite like itself. If none of these are available, then anything large such as Carve or small monsters will do, and if there's still nothing, then Mounted Lords. Wherever you send them against, they are going to do a great chunk of damage, and if it's large, that's all the better. Keeping our 2 Sepulchral Stalkers, and we're now bringing 2 Ushabti Greatbows. We're swapping our Skelly Archers for these lads, since the damage they do is just incredible. Yes, they may fire less shots at once, and not have as much ammo to sling out, but each shot they fire is going to do a significant amount of damage to whatever it hits in massive range. Infantry blobs, large targets, lords and heroes, it doesn't matter, it will all hurt the same. They can still defend themselves okay in melee, but this should be a last resort rather than a full battle plan. We're going to bring 1 Hero Titan, honestly pretty much including one of these because of the spectacle they are, and so badass to watch in action. They deal massive damage to anything in melee, and take a ton of damage to go down, and on top of that you can cast a couple of bound spells, which is just free value. They also have an aura granting you more magic, so they really do come in a very cool and very full package. We're going to take 2 Bone Giants. These are going to be your single target focused artillery. They have a huge range and fire anti-large missiles that chunk whatever they collide with. You're going to use these to focus down any single targets on the enemy side that pose a threat, such as giant monsters, lords and heroes, or luminarchs of Hyche if you're against the Empire. They can do okay in melee, but again, it isn't really where you want to see them if you can help it. And of course, we're taking 2 Screaming Skull catapults, same as before though. If you can get a Casket of Souls, then definitely put that in here. The strengths of this army, a ton of powerful constructs have been added to the army to pack more of a punch in pretty much every single department. The front lines are now a fine mix of monsters and elite infantry, the range has a ton of firepower to take on targets of every sort, and even the lords and heroes are now at peak power levels. As for the weaknesses, still no answer to duel since the Lord is basically a bigger target than ever, even with that extra chunk of damage. Speaking of which, there are now a lot of large targets for the enemy ranged units in this army with all the huge constructs, so ranged heavy enemy armies will have a field day if you don't shut them down. It's also a relatively small army size with a lot of single entities, so enemies with large numbers will surround you quite easily. And finally, that front line, with their relatively low armor, will start to feel the pain when you get to the endgame. Now, to close you out and see how this army performs in battle, I'll pass you over to live commentary Miles. Take it away. Thank you very much for that, Miles. Welcome, everybody, to the Ash Plains, I think it's called. I can't remember. It's the desert map, anyway. And we are, of course, going against the dwarf. No, it's the Empire, of course. It's the Empire, you know, the litmus test. And of course, we're going against a generic lord, the Archlector over here, and it's a fine mix of front lines and a ton of ranged units, which are a massive pain in my ass with my gigantic units over here. As you can see, the Sepulchral Stalkers have been deployed over to the right, and they're going to sneak their way over here because they are still hidden. I'm, of course, using this early game to start targeting all of my ranged units. So my priority targets in my testing were to take out the enemy cav, because they tend to cause a lot of problems and get into all my ranged units, which do provide a ton of firepower. So I'm going to be prioritizing taking them out. The Ushabti Great Bows now moving up to target the enemy Great Swords, just to soften them up, because my front lines is a little bit shit. Normally, I would recommend not focusing your initial barrages on the enemy front lines, because, well, in the end game, your front lines and your monsters should be able to take them out. But it turns out their front lines really do cause mine some significant damage. So I'm going to try and take them out as quickly as possible. And of course, they have the Caribou Greatswords somewhere that are unbreakable, of course. Thanks for that, Empire. As you can see, moving up, I actually choose to move up my front lines much before my monsters, because if not, even when the monsters are moving slowly, they overtake the front lines. I don't know if these are particularly slow. 28 speed is pretty diabolical, to be honest. But then again, no slower than normal greatswords. I think it's just these guys that are exceptionally fast. There we go. So we can see the enemy cav has taken the bait and is now charged into my halberdiers, which actually isn't really the end of the world, since they do have charged defense versus large. Of course, I'm going to take a ton of damage because these are Demogryph Knights, for God's sakes. That's going to hurt. And now I'm going to move in this Kemerian War Sphinx and, of course, the Necro Sphinx over here to try and deal with that as quickly as possible. I believe the halberdiers are over on this side. Yes, there they are. So now these cav are being targeted by my artillery units, my great bows, and my monsters, so they're going to feel the burn very, very quickly indeed. And let's just play this. I've yet to give my Sepulchral Stalkers any orders because I really don't want them to get seen. Tactical move, I swear, and not just because, you know, with an arm like this, there's a lot of micro. There we go, they've been terrified, but I do want to take them out, so I'm going to chase them down if at all possible, and moving the Necro Sphinx into these units here that have been pinned down by the rest of my front lines, and they're going to get caught out by my halberdier, so we should be able to take them out quite nicely. Keeping the Necrotech near to the Necro Sphinx, since it is the unit that tends to take the most damage, and it's going against all those large targets, especially if they have anti-large damage. Slowing it down so I can actually take a breath. Over here we can see that Demogryph Knight halberdiers are wavering, and they are being barraged by the Cascade Assaults. I know I did bring 2. I can't remember actually if you can get 2 in the campaigns. I believe I managed to do it once, but then some people commented saying that they can't, so I don't know. Hopefully you can. If not, Scream Skull Catapults, they're really just as good, to be honest, either or, but I just chose these guys because they look so much better. Look at this Roomba over here. This guy, what an absolute legend with his massive locust going around him. How spooky. As you can see, the Empire Captain has charged Ushabti Great Bow. Not really going to end the best for him. I mean, we're going to take some damage here for sure, but those Ushabti Great Bows do a serious chunk of damage. There we go, got my abilities going out on my Lord now, so he's going to provide leadership buffs and also a ton of damage and terrifyingness to himself. But as you can see, we're taking a ton of fire from the enemy range units, and it's really starting to burn, especially with these Hellstorm rocket batteries. Oh my god, they just fire into my Skelly Bows, and they really don't like it at all. Of course, we have the Realm of Souls up here, which is the passive that all the Tomb King armies get, and you get regeneration there, a bit more regeneration there, and then even more regeneration there, and we can summon Ushabti when we get to the top, so that'll be pretty nice. As you can see, now going to move in my Sepulchral Stalkers. I believe I'll give them an order, but kind of beans it, and then I shout to them in the moments and they get moving. But for now, they're just getting shot to pieces by the great cannons, which are not exactly what you want. As you can see, another charge being made by the Demogryph Knights here. I'm focused firing with all my artillery, and I'm going to focus fire with my Ushabti Great Bows in a second, hopefully, if I am actually paying attention, which I'm not. But nevertheless, with that little health and leadership, a couple of volleys and they will be taken out. On the front lines, it is a little bit of a mess. I believe I lose a lot of my front lines here. In my testing, I discovered that, Tomb King front lines, not very good. So, I lose a lot of my front lines. But, you know, we live and learn with these things. Oh, wonderful barrage coming in from these Cascade Souls onto the Great Swords there. Now, as you can see, as the majority of this area of the front lines has broken, I'm now going to move our Necro Sphinx into taking out the Luminarch of Hysh. Because I have all these large targets, it is a really high priority target for me to get rid of it, because I just don't want it. And I'm, of course, going to send my Tomb King Lord in to the enemy range units, because with that fantastic 68 speed, he can chase them down and do a ton of damage. I have already summoned my Ushabtis over here, and I believe they were on some range units, but have now been caught by some Demogryph Knight halberds, which is fine if they die. They're a summon, they're going to die anyway. My other Kemerian War Sphinx, nice, so there sounds a lot going on, over here fighting with some handgunners with a little bit of help from 4 units of Tomb Guard halberdiers, who are probably going to die. Yes, because they have 3 entities. Yeah, they are absolutely dying very, very quickly. As you can see, my artillery is finally safe from the enemy cav units, so now we're just focus firing on great swords and stuff to try and push this advantage and win as quickly as possible. The Sepulchral Stalkers have now finally made it in and have been firing into the backs of these great swords, or are about to fire into the backs of these great swords. 1 to 2. There we go. Now they're firing, and they're going to do some wonderful damage there. These lads are now moving into firing against silver bullets, as is the Necrotech moving in to assist with that. The Necro Sphinx is now being intercepted by the steam tank, which is fine. It's still a large target, so he should do some decent damage there. Of course, he's continuing to fire into my Sepulchral Stalkers, which is a bit of a pain in the arse. And of course, some Demogryph Knights now charging into them. And rather than attacking from range, they decided to actually walk up to them, which really thanks for that. I really, really love you, you absolute morons. As you can see, most of my front lines, in fact, yes, that is all of my front lines units have now broken, so we are struggling just a little bit. But Arbor Greatswords moving into the Ushabti Greybow, so we're going to try and take them out as quickly as possible. I haven't quite realised it yet, but in melee, these guys should be able to take them on quite nicely. And of course, the constant barrages from all my artillery units should be managing to chip these guys down nice and quick. Hero Titan there is fighting against the enemy lord, which is it's Battle Lector, isn't it? Arch Lector, sorry. Oh, that wonderful laser beam. I absolutely love that unit. It is beautiful. And he should do absolutely fine in this clump here. He has like 1200 health at max. It's ridiculous. The Lich Priest and Nehekara, not in the best position. That was some poor positioning by me, and he is surely going to perish. This is probably the highest casualties you're going to see out of a lot of the armies here, because I don't know, for some reason I just can't get Tomb King armies to survive. It's just I just can't do it. They just lose the leadership and then immediately die. There we go. The steam tank has been reduced in health quite substantially, and now the Greatsword's moving in to keep the next Sphinx still while the Luminarch and these steam tanks try to take them down. But it looks like the Luminarch is actually focus firing onto the Sepulchral Stalks, which isn't the nicest thing that you could possibly be doing. At this point, we are more or less cleaning up. Like, the majority of their units are broken. There we go, that big old chunk skull there has broken. The only thing that's left is the Arch Lector, and as we continue to take more and more of their units out, we will start to press the advantage and get that armor losses as quickly as possible. The Sepulchral Stalkers, they're taking a massive hit of damage, continuing to fire into the steam tank. I really don't want them to go into melee combat, but it looks like it's going to happen because my positioning is absolutely terrible. And these guys, for some reason, moving in to fight the Great Swords in melee, despite having a ton of ammo left. Oh, I love these guys. I do love them, but oh, they sometimes just don't pay attention. As you can see, my Lord's still running rampage in the back lines, being assisted by the Overkemrian War Sphinx now. Of course, they're taking a ton of damage, but they just have so much health. What is their max health? Just under 10,000. So, yeah, they can stick around and take a bunch of shots. Of course, you don't want them to, but, you know, they can do it. And there we go. I believe that is army losses. We managed to press the advantage with 42 units left on our side. And even when we broke them, they had many more units than we did. But look at that. They had like 500 more units than us, just because with that many large targets, I wish I could speak. Your army size is just that small. Of course, the only thing left to take out is a Caribou Greatswords, and we've just got one guy here. Nope. There we go, and he's done. Victory has been achieved. And yes, I know what you're going to say. I lost the majority of my army, so can I truly call this a win? But you know what? I played this battle a fair few times, and I tried a bunch of compositions, and I could not get them to die. Something about Tomb Kings that can't do it. But, you know, we all live and learn. So let's just go to the stats and take a look. So, starting first with the Tomb King Lord, 7,503 damage done with 67 kills. Of course, he was charging into the backlines for the majority and fighting the Great Swords when he wasn't in the backlines, so his damage value isn't going to be the greatest. 1,200 is certainly nothing terrible, but it could be a lot better if he was fighting high-value tags. But I chose to use that speed to get him into the backlines because I realised that if I don't take out those backlines, they're going to take me out very, very quickly. Look at all that armor piercing and the bonus versus large for the Huntsman. Very painful indeed. The Lich Priest got a couple of casts off, and also a couple of damaging casts, I should say, and also a couple of utility casts. His death was not in vain. Hopefully, by this point in your campaigns, you've got him on immortal status. Otherwise, this would be very, very sad. As I said, lost a lot of units, but this is the best I could do, and I wasn't willing to fight it again because I've tried it a bunch of times. The Necrotect here, not the most kills, but again, they are just there for your passive value. You don't really care how many kills they get. You just care that they stand next to the other constructs and allow them to do all the killing. As you can see, lost every single one of the front lines units with a decent chunk of damage, not too many kills on them all. Pretty much just there as a wall, honestly. If I was going to change anything about this composition, I might even consider just getting rid of the front line and just having like Ushabti or something on the front lines. Just something that's a bit faster because they are just so slow and the armor is poor and the damage isn't the best. Going against Great Swords, they just can't really do it. So if you're going to swap anything, probably swap those from Ushabti or something that's got a lot more armor and a lot more damage. Moving on to the Ushabti Greatbow, speaking of which, 76 and 74 kills, very, very similar there. Of course, a lot more damage value on these guys, despite only getting 2 more kills. They must have been the ones that are firing at the Demogryph Knight Halberdiers, which are a little bit more expensive. These are a fantastic unit. Firing them against Great Swords seems like it might be a little bit of a waste because the missiles, if they only hit one entity, they're only going to do damage to that one entity, whereas if they hit a Demogryph Knight, then that is a lot more HP, and it's a large percentage of the unit that's getting destroyed, if that makes sense. I hope it does. Yes, target these guys on something that is a high value target and preferably a small entity number target, so that will maximize the damage of each and every missile. The Sepulchral Stalkers over here with 500 and 1500 damage value. One of these must have been shooting at the beam tank, and I'm guessing it's the one with the least kills because the beam tanks are of course extremely expensive units, but If you take it out, it might be 1 kill, but it counts for a hell of a lot. Of course, bring them in so late does mean that they miss out on that initial charge, but if I bring them in early, again, they just get ripped to pieces by the enemy range units. I wanted to get into the enemy ranged before I bring them in to allow them to get the maximum amount of damage that they could. And when they did come in, and when they did come in, they managed to do a ton of damage to the enemy front lines, back lines, meme tank. They took on everything. They did fantastic work with those missiles. The melee damage isn't the best if they're getting against anything that has some decent anti-large, but they more than make up for it with the ranged. Of course, the Bone Giants here were tagged in the enemy large units, so 958 and 855 damage value there. I used to focus them on the Lunax of Heish, but I've now chose to start focusing them on the enemy cav, just to basically keep them safe later in the battle. Now, the Bone Giants, for some reason, for me, aren't the most accurate units in the world. So shooting them against single targets, if you can do that, make sure they are very large so they don't miss. And if you can shoot them against cav, just make sure there's a big blob of cav, because if they miss with one of those shots, it really does feel bad and it really does hamper their damage output. The Khemrine War Sphinx for 120 kills with a perfect 1200 damage value. That is very satisfying to me. Of course, these guys are going straight into the front lines, straight into the back lines. They're super fast. They work like pseudo cav. Brilliant units, the Khemrine War Sphinxes. Anything that is infantry based, they can take out without barely any trouble. Of course, if they get surrounded by a bunch of range units or a bunch of anti-large like halberdiers, then they're going to struggle a bit more. But in this situation, they managed to push through the enemy front lines and into their back lines to do some very nice work indeed. The Hero Titan, 62 kills, 831 damage value. I used their casts. You didn't see many of them. I think I used a life leeching on the Battle Lecter and a magic missiles, whatever you call it, the zoom one. It's the Law of Light and it's the missiles one. I can't remember what it's called. Okay, what do you want from me? But yes, I used both of those a couple of times over the course of the battle and just stick them in melee, and they do so much damage. They are literal tanks. 1200 health is ridiculous. They can just soak up so much damage, and you really can just send them in. Don't really have to babysit them. The Necker Sphinx was, of course, tagged in. Oh, mama, that is some delightful damage value. They were, of course, tagged in large targets, so they went straight after the cav and managed to get 2 units of kills basically under their belt. So even though they only got 39 kills with nearly 3,000 damage value, that is very impressive indeed. The Casket of Souls with 58 and 98 kills there, 1,000, sorry, and 1,500 damage value. Certainly nothing to scoff at. But again, they were focusing on that cav to get it taken out as quickly as possible. Then after that, you can focus these guys on pretty much anything because their missiles, they hardly ever miss. They have a fantastic range. They do so much damage to pretty much everything. You can fire them against anything and they'll do a great job. And I believe that wraps us up on how to build Tomb King armies. If you enjoyed this video at any point, then do be sure to leave a like. It really does help out the video so very much. And if you want to see more content like this, then do consider subscribing to the channel. And hit that bell notification so you never miss a video. If you'd like to support the channel, then you can check out the merch website, which is linked in the description. We've got all sorts of cool designs on there, and anything you buy is a really direct way to help out the channel. Speaking of which, I'd like to take this time to thank all supporters, both here on YouTube as well as on Twitch and Patreon. In particular, I'd like to thank Kobe Said So and It's Your Boy LC for their fantastic support at the Unclean Ones tier. And of course, a massive thank you to every single supporter. It really does mean so much. And finally, thank you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.